Welcome to Darker Days Radio presents Darkhammer, a Worlds of Warhammer podcast. I'm one of the regular hosts, Chris, and as always, I'm joined by David. Hello.
Hello.
And we're joined by Mike.
Yo, how's it going?
Pretty good. It's warm.
Mm.
It's very warm.
Yes,
It's freaking hot out. Jeez.
it's sweaty
It is
and
very
humid.
warm. We're going to be talking about Genestealer Cults. So we're going
Steal
to
your genes.
really warn up front when we get into the main segment. It could get a little squicky because we're talking about biology of how they reproduce, and we're going to talk about the nuts and bolts of that. But before we get into that, let's talk about let's do a little bit of a game update. We've been running on the Dark Days Radio stream. We've been running Iron Kingdoms RPG. I've been running it. Mike, you've been playing. We've had a new player with Ian joining, who's been playing a Menite priest slash swordsman duelist swashbuckler. So he's kind of like a musketeer from Ord.
Cool.
Right now, you're chasing down a presumed serial killer, and last time we left it.
Chris, I believe last time we left it, I was assuming that it was a Gator Man that did it, and then we ended the episode in front of a bunch of Gator Men in the sewers. So clearly my character was right the entire time, and we're just going to prove that for the rest of the session.
Yep, there's Gateman. It's fun.
Always
It's going really well. As we record this, Onyx PathCon is wrapping up. There was also Elysium, which was a World of Darkness con run by Renegade Games. There's lots of new announcements. Basically, just check our social media. There's some reprints of stuff with errata in there, like the core book for Vampire. There's tons of new announcements. Sabbat book, Second Inquisition, Sabbat Deluxe, which has like a cuneiform tablet. It's all pretty mental.
Book of Nod.
So yeah, there was a lot there. If you're new to World of Darkness, you can obviously check that out. More importantly, and on topic of stuff we're interested in, there's a new scenario series coming out for Wrath and Glory, which is looking at a particular kind of event battle, but where each scenario will be for a different tier. So you look at the event from a different perspective. So you're grunts on the battlefield, and then you might be well-trained grunts, and you might be like an Inquisitor, etc., etc. You get the idea. So that's new from Cubicle 7. The Horned Rat is out to buy on PDF and to order, which is great because that's another book I've written on. I wrote the entire end part of the scenario, so that's the there's a Skaven fortress and a attempt to blow up the moon.
Did you take some hints from maybe somewhere where we worked back in the 2000s, Chris, on that one? And what we may have built at some point?
A little, but that was, I mean, it's a discussion for another day maybe, but that was actually, I wasn't told to write that. That was the plan. So that replaces Something Rotten in Kislev as the fourth part of the Enemy Within campaign series.
Yeah, Chris, I was shocked to hear that they were removing Something Rotten in Kislev and replacing it with a different scenario. Because, old grognards like myself remember that that one scenario that really just stood out as not fitting in at all to the rest of the vibe.
Yeah, Kislev should not have been in that at all.
So Kislev could be, just the way they wrote it made no sense. It was just this weird dungeon crawl in the middle of a highly developing political scenario in the Empire.
Weird. So yeah, that's out. It was very cool to write on. And yeah, it does have references to a certain other thing that me and David helped build in Manchester many moons ago. Many moons ago. Oh, it'll be about 2003.
I think it would be about 2001, 2002. It would actually be about 20 years ago.
Did it come before?
I was in my second year.
Yeah, did it come before or after the scale model of? No, I'm thinking of the scale model of Helm's Deep.
It came before Helm's Deep.
Was it before Helm's Deep? Oh,
it was before Helm's Deep. It was being built, I think, when I joined.
Yeah. So yeah, that was fun. And then also the really big obvious announcement that's related to stuff we're interested in is the fact that Age of Sigmar 3rd edition is coming with lots of new modifications to how the game plays, in the sense of like not the core mechanics, but like how you build your forces, command points, so that the game is more active when it's not even your turn.
Yeah, reactive command points look really
And
fun.
obviously, we're getting a crusade-like format where you can start with a very small force and build up. I also like that in the core book, from the spoilers seen elsewhere on the interwebs, there are suggested battlefield sizes and everything. So, like 750 points is supported. So that's
Yeah, no, this
literally
is all. It's all been confirmed now. So yeah, they're doing a 750, 1,000, 100, 1,500, 2,000. So they're supporting the smaller games, and the Crusade thing that you mentioned is called Path to Glory in AOS,
yeah.
and that leads you straight into a 750 game. You run your Path to Glory, end up with a 750 point army, and then you kind of build up from there. So
Which is cool.
it just kind of really flows really nicely.
Because 750 points is pretty much what you get in a start collecting box.
Yeah, it's not much. It's really
No,
not.
it really isn't.
It's not back in the days of 7th and 8th edition where you end up with 700 models on a table.
They've also nerfed horde armies by the looks of it, by
They've
limiting how many.
Yeah, they've changed the way you do horde armies, and I'm iffy on that. I need to understand how that kind of works on a larger scale. But they give you a certain number of kind of like command points in a way to bolster the number of models you can have in a unit. So
Yeah.
it could very well nerf horde armies, but they've also nerfed conga lines, which is really good. So
and then the other thing I want to do a shout out for is the guys at the Rookery. So they are some former Cubicle 7 writers, developers. So like Andy Law, who used to be lead developer on Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, and also Graham Davis, who writes for Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. Horned Rat is also one of the directors for the company. So they're relatively new. So they're working on like initially their first product they're putting out called Sea of Fools is like a rules agnostic scenario, and they're kind of working from that kind of perspective. So that should be quite interesting. The artwork obviously is going to be fantastic looking already, because that's Mark Gibbons who's doing the art for that. And he's also part of the company. So they also do some streaming of stuff. So the most recent streaming was like why city settings are so fun for gaming. And there's a lot of heavy reference, obviously, to Warhammer, because cities are so, are characters in their own right within Warhammer Fantasy. And obviously a lot of reference to Vampire, because, again, Vampire is so fixated on that. And, when you consider the age of the guys behind that company, the fact that Graham Davis also wrote on Vampire the Masquerade, these are both formative games in the terms of people's careers or in their hobby, timeline, and how that influences their current productions. So it was very interesting chatting to them about stuff and on their stream, because obviously it's very similar for us. Right, I think that's everything. Is there anything else I've missed?
Nope, that's it.
Some fun stuff going on though. Right, so the main segment.
I think we need to look at AOS 3rd edition one day
Oh,
full
yeah.
for the ideas and the changing of the story and stuff. So
oh yeah, there's a lot going on with that. We'll have to talk about that for the RPG.
Yeah.
Anyway, so our main segment is Genestealer Cults. So content warning: this is going to get squicky. Right, I'm gonna start a little bit of this, and then I'm gonna mostly hand over when I get a little bit bored. Not bored, but like exhausted. Right, so Genestealers are kind of are quite iconic, actually. I think in 40k, they've been around for a while, but they really found their identity in first edition Space Hulk. That's where they really got defined as a look, because they do appear in Rogue Trader, Warhammer 40k first edition. but they went through a bit of a change of the look, and they really fit the space Hulk theme of horrible aliens invading a derelict massive ships in the case of a space Hulk, and Terminators having to clean them out. So what is a Genestealer? Well, obviously they're a Xenos race. I say race, species of a grander race. And they were first originated, the Imperium believe they originated on the moons of Yumgal, or Umgal. Mostly pronounced that quite wrong. But anyway, and they were obviously found also throughout space, having by some means infiltrating other ships, space hulks, and also infiltrating populations. Genestealers are highly sneaky, intelligent, very dangerous, very powerful. They're capable of a lot of violence, and they have a biological cycle which makes them a real threat to most humanoid races. And when you think the Imperium really doesn't like mutants caused by the infiltration of chaos, what could be worse than the infiltration of genetic DNA, genetic material from a Xenos race?
Mm-hmm.
So Genestealers, as I said, they have this original kind of idea of where they came from. The Imperium had this idea they come from Yumgal, and that stupid people would have mostly landed there, and these creatures secrete themselves onto the ships, go into hibernation, hide away quite easily, and then spread from planet to planet that way, obviously propagating their accursed genome through other races. But that then all changed with the first Tyrannic War. So the first Tyrannic War is when High Fleet Behemoth, arrived into the galaxy, and that's in 745 M41, to give you kind of a context with regard to contemporary 40k timelines. And of course, amongst High Fleet Behemoth, they noticed there were Genestealers. And that made everyone just go, fuck. Because that then reveals that Genestealers are not some creature native to Yumgar. They're actually a vanguard force that arrived many centuries before, and have been a plague on the galaxy, preparing the way for the arrival of the High Fleets. Now, there are other things that drew the High Fleets to our galaxy, in particular the Astronomicon, but that's another discussion for another day. So the biology then of Genestealers, they are six-limbed. They're about marine-sized, though maybe if they were stood up fully stood up properly, though they're more haunched over, moving around, skulking around. They've got digigrade legs, dog legs, double jointed. They have then two more humanoid-like arms. They actually have 5 digits on their hands, and they have two more arms that end in 4 digits. Though those digits are razor-sharp claws capable of slicing even through Terminator armor, which is a horrifying thought in its own
You've
right.
you've not actually put it in here, but those other 2 arms that appear at the top can also just be stabby points.
Oh yeah. There are obviously Genestealers can have varied mutations. So, for example, the Yumgal strain, they are a strain that is fairly stable, even with the way that Genestealers breed. It means even through breeding with getting their genetic material into other races, you still get Yumgal pure strains being produced. And they have a lamprey-like mouth, or if you go by Rogue Trader, but that's been kind of retconned. So really, what their mouth is more like is a whole host of feeder tentacles, which again is terrifying. Very Cthulhu kind of elements to that. Also, kind of similar to the lictors that have feeder tentacles that they can eat people's brains and learn their stuff. Genestealers also have rather bulbous heads, representing the fact they are highly intelligent. Also, mostly related to the fact that every Genestealer is a latent psychic, because of how they can then further mutate, potentially. They've got a hardened exoskeleton, equivalent to maybe flak or carapace armor. They're also really hard to kill because they have redundant organs. They don't actually need to breathe an oxygen-rich atmosphere or any atmosphere because they can live in space quite happily. They don't have their circulatory system is open, so they don't have traditional blood vessels as we do. They've got some lymphatic system that just floods the organs that are there. As I said, they can hibernate for long periods of time, so they can just like get themselves snuggled in on someone's ship and just go into stasis for a while until it's ready to hop out and invade and infect a planet. And then really the most important element of the Genestealers, which makes them terrifying, icky, and a threat to the Imperium in particular, I would say, and likely Eldari and the Tau and Orcs to an extent, is the fact that Genestealers have a proboscis located in the mouth, which is essentially it's their ovipositor, which allows them to do what's known as the Genestealer's kiss. So when a Genestealer gets onto a planet, it will sneak around and infect someone, and it will deliver genetic material into the host. The host then is in thrall with the Genestealer, and slowly, and I imagine that this is because the biomass delivered is a retrovirus. It's mostly just reverse transcriptase. Is rewriting the DNA so that when the host then mates, breeds with more of their kin, that genetic material is then part of the offspring, which leads to a hybrid. These hybrids are part human, part Genestealer. They have between, generally in the first generation, 5 or 6 limbs. Some of these limbs look more humanoid, some of them look more Genestealer-like. They will have Genestealer-like, they'll be haunched over, their legs will be double jointed, they will have razor sharp claws, or they might have regular claws, they might even have like lash whips growing from their hands, though that's normally metamorphs. So that's quite terrifying. And then they breed with more humans, or more of whatever the host race is, or with more of their kin as well. And then you get the next generation, which have less signs of mutation, so they're not going to have the multiple limbs as much. They'll be down to only having generally 3 arms at most. They'll still have the ridges on their brow. They'll still have strange, elongated, bulbous heads, but they're less Genestealer. And then they'll breed.
That's actually the 3rd generation.
Is that third generation?
3rd gen. Second gen is the one which allows them to speak and communicate.
Oh yeah, okay. And then the next generation, 4th gen, is where we get to hybrids that will look more or less human. So things that'll be wrong with them will be they might have the faintest element of ridges on their brow. They won't have hair, but they don't have bulbous heads. So they're more or less human looking, and they can disguise themselves as human looking, and that allows them therefore to infiltrate into I say human society, but it could also be Eldari society easily. And where it then gets squicky is when you then even more squicky is where you have the offspring of them, and they don't produce hybrids. They actually they sire a child who is a pure strain Genestealer. So it isn't a bundle of pink blubbery flesh, with 2 arms, 2 legs, as we expect. No, it's a Genestealer. It's a small, tiny Genestealer that's going to grow mostly quite rapidly. And I imagine all hybrids mature quite rapidly. And
because we made notes about this, and I was curious about this. There's nothing which really states it, but these cults can last for hundreds of years. So I'm guessing that they actually probably just mature at normal rates.
I believe that's the case. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's an odd thing
And-
'cause they don't actually cover it. So
And then, of course, the horrifying thing is that the parents of this gene stealer,
love it.
their mind is so riddled and affected by the psychic resonance that's created by the cult, see it as just a regular baby of their race. So they're cooing
We
over
love
this
the
thing
alien
which has
baby.
got chitinous armored exoskeleton, claws, a mouthful of teeth, and it's horrifying.
It's
It is,
so
it is.
beautiful.
But I mean, so one of the things that's a little contradictory in the text is that sometimes it seems as though the pure strain gene stealer is born to a hybrid parent and a parent of the local species as well. And even the parent of that local species, who's not part of the cult, hasn't had their DNA changed exactly, will also see this as just a beautiful, adorable.
It's a very
six-limbed
weird thing that, and it kind of comes into something which we'll talk about later with the loyalty, is they are connected and they are obsessed with the cult and the connections that they have, and that nothing else matters.
And that's of course related to the progenitor of the cult. You want to talk about that then, David?
Well, there's a little bit before that where
go for that.
There are also, so we've got the hybrids, and these are kind of like the main part of the Genestealer cult force and who they are. But they are also able to infect humans and not turn them into these hybrids, the aberrants or mutants out there. And these are known as brood brothers. And so these people actually do belong to the cult. They fully are indoctrinated into it, and they have that massive loyalty and will do anything for the cult. But because they are not mutants or aberrants or hybrids or whatever, they look human. They are pure human.
Oh yeah.
And so they're
carrying the
society.
curse.
And
they're
go
carrying
and
the
spread.
genetic curse.
Yeah, so it's a genetic curse. It's called the Nexus. And these are very, very important within the cults, and I think we'll cover that later when Mike goes on and talks about how we make a cult. So yeah, then the progenitor gene stealer is the first one. Is the gene stealer who came across and ended up in the planet somehow. And over time, after they have created the cult and passed on their gene seed, I suppose, a bit like Space Marines, they begin to mutate. And change from being this pure strain murder machine into kind of like, I'm going to say like a baby emperor of mankind in a way. They become a psychic hub for the cult. They become the conduit between which the cult is able to kind of communicate and get its orders and understand what's going on and things like that. They grow in size and they grow in great psychic ability. They become really, really, really powerful as they also begin to lose their abilities to move because they become fat and lazy.
That's less so now.
Oh, is that less so now?
Patriots.
It is, isn't it? Yeah.
That's classic. Patriots now are just very big and dangerous.
Yeah.
If you've seen the models that come in, like what would have been Death Watch Overkill, and you can now buy separately a Patriot model.
Yeah. Yeah. Sorry, I will take that back about old school Warhammer.
Well,
anyway.
I mean, that's a cool thing to bring up, David, because you can have the Patriarch portrayed in different ways, right? You know, maybe this specific strain of Genestealer, that's what happens to them. They are just this bloated, Nurgle-ish guy, Genestealer on the throne, which, you know, could be a pretty interesting
that idea of like, because its psychic powers grow, it no longer needs the use of its body, and its body can either grow or wither, and you can have all that kind of concepts throwing into it as well. So very X-Men or Deviant, as we discussed a couple of weeks ago. What else have we got? The Genestealer curse is it's a retrovirus. So
I imagine it is at most.
Yeah,
it's the only thing that makes sense.
Yeah, it does, because it's a virus that changes the genetic makeup of the creatures or the species that it infects. So I'm guessing it's going to be something like that. We've talked about the gestation period a little bit, and when we come to the Eldari, there's a little bit more on the gestation period there. So I'm not going to say anything on it now. We said it could be quick, it could be long, it could be normal. But when we talk about Eldari, we'll get into that a little bit more. There are, as we've said, with the Patriarch. So the name for that progenitor gene stealer is the Patriarch. Now, obviously, that name comes with connotations, but there are other mutations as well that are possible within the generations, and so you can get these things called aberrants, which are absolutely humongous. They're kind of like the Genestealer version of an ogre, I suppose.
Yeah.
They are huge. They are the brutish things which will pick up road signs and slap you around the face with a road sign because they're not that intelligent, and they'll just use anything as a weapon. When you get to the 4th generation, you end up these humans will end up developing psychic powers, and you can get things called magus, who are kind of seen as the cult leaders of the Brood Brothers in a way, because they are able to have psychic abilities and communicate clearly to the patriarch and things. So there are different levels of kind of these things, and you can move up and down in the hierarchy of the cult depending on your mutations and aberrations and things. Like aberrants, they're not going to be high up in the cult, but they're going to have a very specific place with a very specific job that you don't want to tell them not to do, and things like that. So what we've talked about here is mostly we've talked about the Genestealer and then kind of what they do to the society and what they do, and then kind of broadening this idea of the cult. And so what is a Genestealer cult? And I think we'll pass over to Mike now. What is actually the Genestealer cult?
Yeah, absolutely. So, as we've kind of been describing, the basic physiology and exactly like the biology that's going on here. The Genestealer cult starts with that one progenitor, the patriarch Genestealer, who's stowed away in a ship and hidden in a dark place, forgotten for decades or maybe centuries. But eventually, when they sense that it is time, either through some sort of like alien intellect or sensing the psychic woes of the local population, the Genestealer will begin to infect the DNA of the local species. And of course, anyone that's infected is going to be beholden to the patriarch, and they will sexually reproduce, and the infected will pass on that DNA and that infection to the children. And this cult lies in wait in dark corners of society. Some cults growing in the manufactorums or the more industrial parts of a hive world, let's say. But others could actually start to grow in the upper echelons of society, in the bureaucracy or the administratum of the planet. And this is especially easy once you start getting into the later generations of the Genestealer cults, because that 3rd and 4th gen, they look much closer to humans. So it's a lot easier for them to operate in society, whether they just have like a strange skin tone, which in a hive world that could just be just eczema or something, or some kind of industrial effect or pollution effect. 3rd generations, they can probably hide in cloaks and robes and the like. And also societies that have a lot of mutations and abhumans, this really allows the cult to expand exponentially in its final years. And the easy way to identify the cultists, however, is that they all commonly have this kind of worm-like mark or branding on them, which shows that they have that membership to the cult. So that can be something that the Inquisition looks for when they are suspicious of a cult and looking around. So while at first the cult organizes around the patriarch, as it grows, certain hybrids take over duties and responsibilities of the expanding faction. So a pretty common one is to have a magus, who is kind of a prophet for the cult, or a prophet for the patriarch, enacting their will. And these are gifted psychers of the cult who have lots of charisma and telepathic abilities, which can help control the hybrids and the Brood Brothers. But they also have the ability to dominate the minds of their enemies, which is particularly useful when the uprising finally comes. There's also the Sanctuses, which are basically stealthy assassin hybrids who can appear pretty much almost anywhere. In the miniatures game, they feel like the old Dark Elf assassins or the Skaven assassins from Warhammer Fantasy, so they're quite a bit of fun. Finally, another interesting one that really stands out is the, I believe this is pronounced Nexoses as opposed to Nexuses. And they're pretty interesting. They're kind of like these, they're connected to the nexus of the Genestealer cult. And they're sort of like living data servers, absorbing information from all of the organisms that are indoctrinated into the cult, and working as sort of strategic supercomputers, psychically relaying information and battle plans to all the hybrids. But what holds these Genestealer cults together? It really comes down to faith and psychers. So the cultists are under the sway of the Genestealer patriarch and his magi's psychic and liturgical influence. And this creates this rapturous cult that believes that they will ascend to some heaven when their space gods arrive. Little do they know that these saviors are an all-consuming leviathan.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Yeah, it's I think the cult is really interesting in that they have a long-term plan. Really, I think that's what's really insidious about them. I think we often think of like, I think by comparison, chaos cults flare up quite rapidly once it reaches a critical mass, and I think Genestealer cults are maybe a little bit more careful because they have a long-term game, which is to really be, and we'll get to this, is really to reach critical mass so that they're of use right before a hive fleet arrives. So I think they're and also maybe a Genestealer cult's actually even harder to detect than a chaos cult.
Very much so. Very
Because these guys are their main goal is to still appear as part of normal society as you infiltrate it.
Oh yeah, I mean
they're pretty much what chaos cultists should do, but don't.
Yeah,
indeed. It's interesting. The texts do bring up that many of the Brood Brothers they work harder than everyone else. They're almost like the pinnacles of society, and they're working really hard. In the gun manufactorum, just making tons of guns to help out the war effort.
All the guys in sanitation are really good at building tunnels that are never used.
Indeed. Little do the administratum realize that there's really a cult going on, and some of those guns are making their way into the stockpiles of the patriarch, or connecting to some hidden den where the aberrants can attack from.
Yeah, so that's kind of the main point. It's like, as Chris was saying, it's like they hide in the shadows and they wait. They're patient. Like the hive fleets that they're waiting for are millennia old. They kind of do warp travel, but it's not quick. They're not moving at a quick space. So these cults, they sit there and they plot and they plan and get ready for this insurgency. That is their entire design. They're going to rise up through the sewers and things, and then take over the planet and prepare it to be munched by the great space caterpillar that's coming its way. So yeah, the Brood Brothers, as you say, they're the ones who are preparing the planet for the uprising. So it's kind of like a multiple layer thing going on here. The Brood Brothers preparing a planet for an insurgency. The insurgency is preparing the planet to be munched. So it's kind of, you're seeing layers there. This unfortunately doesn't always go the way that the cult want. So the main drive of a cult is propagation. They are looking to expand their numbers. And so when you are expanding your numbers and trying to get bigger and bigger and bigger, hiding in the streets is not always, hiding in the shadows is not always going to work. But they do have a specific time and a specific plan of when things are going to happen. But obviously things can go wrong. Like aberrants can wander off, and suddenly you've got this massive fucking hulking great creature walking around the streets that you can't say is a mutant, and then suddenly the Inquisition comes down and goes, well, there's a worm on that, there's a tattooed worm on that, and things go wrong. So but then things can go wrong in other ways. The Hive Fleet might not arrive. So there are examples that the Hive Fleet that they're preparing for disappears, or just decides, no, I don't need that planet, I'm going somewhere else, or it's been delayed because of a war in another planet. And so the cults rise up, take over a planet, and suddenly they're in control of a planet. And then that's when things with the cults, with the Imperium, get really, really iffy, because they're like, oh crap, we now have a planet to deal with. And then the planet still kind of, to some extent, behaves a bit like an Imperial planet, and they send off all the ships that live on the planet and send out emissaries to other planets. So it's a really quick way to kind of spread it. And some of those ships are actually go, where are these hive fleets? Let's go find them. So even though they are looking to kind of rise up and prepare the planet for the Hive fleets. Things do go wrong sometimes, and so that can kind of lead into some cool ideas for games that we'll talk about later. So yeah, there's connections there. I will do one more quick thing, and then I'll leave the rest of the session up to you guys. And this is kind of, so we've talked about this a little bit. So the cults can appear on any kind of Imperial world. So they're on Agri worlds, they're on Hive worlds, Death worlds, and each cult will adapt to its surroundings. So a Hive world, they will work with the gangers. They are. If you look at Necromunda, there are rules for Genestealer cults within the game. There on the Agri world, they've got access to a lot of different biomass and a lot of different creatures in there, and they can spread that way. And then the creatures can rise up and attack as well. I didn't look at how they'd work on death planets, death worlds. I suppose it kind of depends on what kind of death world it is. If it's a forest one like Katachan, bet there's a lot of fun there that they can have. But they can also, as we say, infect other Xenos species. So the big ones that they can affect are the Eldari, the Orcs, the Kroot, and the Tau, and these are kind of the main ones that you see in the game. But things don't work quite as well with these as they do with humans. Humans are easy to manipulate, not that psychically active, but do have psychic abilities. There's a lot of them, and there's a short gestation period. So the problem with the Eldari is Eldari have a very long gestation period. So this causes issues with kind of building the cult up quickly enough. And the other issue is Eldari have very strong latent psychic abilities that are well trained. And so they can sense the shadow and the warp that Genestealers and the Tyranids create. And this even comes down to specific individuals and not just the Hive Fleet itself. So they can kind of detect when something's coming their way before it actually arrives, so they can go shoot it and kill it before they get infected. Now, orcs would be an absolutely terrifying thought of crossing an orc with a Genestealer. Absolutely terrifies me, gives me nightmares.
And there were miniatures back in the day.
There were, yeah. But
I think there was.
It's
pretty sure
I
there
think
was.
in Rogue Trader era, there were things like that. But orcs, again, they have this kind of latent psychic ability. I can't remember what it's called, but there's this kind of latent psychicness within orcs themselves, the wag, I suppose, in a way.
Yeah, they have a Gestalt psychic ability.
Yeah. And this allows them to sense kind of a wrongness in the infected orcs. And so orcs then tend to go, well, you're not right. I'm going to beat you up because I'm an orc and you're not normal. And I don't like things like that. And I just want to fight anyway. So orcs do that. Kroot, again, they have the same kind of idea. They're able to sense a wrongness in an infected because Kroot talk through pheromones a lot and communicate through pheromones. And the infected smell funny. They also have Kroot shapers as well, who are able to manipulate the evolutionary traits of the Kroot. And so these guys can pick it up as well. There have been cases of the Tau being connected to the cult. The problem with the Tau, though, is the baseline Tau, the casts, are psychically boring and dead and kind of just generally ignored. They don't appear within the warp and have no latent psychic abilities. The only difference here is the ethereals, the leader caste, the leader caste, I suppose is the best way to say it. They are psychically active, but there's not many of them, and it's a bit hard for the cult to get their hands on them. So the cult generally leave the tower alone because, well, they're a small force anyway, and they can't really do much with them because of their psychic inactivity or psychic nullness, I suppose, is the way they should say it. So it's really interesting looking at how the Genestealer cults react to other species and why humans are so good to be turned and used as tools.
Yeah. No, that's pretty interesting. Actually, so as you were talking about that, David, I wonder what would happen. So it's tough for the Kroot to be infected and have a cult form.
It's not tough for them to be infected. It's not tough for them to be infected. It's easy to get them infected. It's just when they are infected, it's really easy to find them.
Yeah,
I think that's
easy to find. The shaper will notice. Yeah, it makes sense. But the Kroot also gain traits when they consume the flesh of what they kill. So I wonder if that is the key right there. So they start eating the Genestealers that they just wrecked. and that is how the cult could form with the Kroot there.
You could then end up, with a small tribe of Kroot that isn't separates from maybe the main armies or something, and then and you could get some fun stuff that way.
Yeah. They wouldn't have the patriarch though, so that would make it pretty weird. But I don't know. Yeah. There's a story hook there, I'm sure.
Yeah, I think I think I put a note in when we were talking about how do we use these in the games, and I kind of used a similar idea with the Drukhari. So
yeah.
Oh definitely. God, yeah, and the Drukhari happily even capture Genestealers for sport.
Yeah, I know.
Absolutely.
Because they're nuts. Anyway, yeah, so so Genestealers have a long history with the Imperium. I say long history. It has a history throughout at least the 41st millennium. How far back it goes is another question. There might be things that have been lost since the Horus Heresy. There might have been records then. I imagine there were only a few Genestealers maybe in the galaxy even then. But of course, the fact is, the forces of the Tyranids were drawn by the Astronomicon. So the first apparent recorded engagement of Imperial Guard forces with Genestealers was on Gozar Quintus, a mining colony, where an inquisitor discovered a corrupt Imperial Creed church, or there was corruption of the Imperial Creed there. He went along to investigate, and then sent a strange missive saying everything's fine, and then disappeared, which is, clearly signs that he got infected. And then eventually, forces arrived, and the Death Watch arrived, and the kill team discovered that the Great Pit, so a mine, was filled with the cult of the Four-Armed Emperor, and essentially had to obliterate the entire population of that mining colony. Other fun historical events. This one relating to the Eldar relates to Craftworld Ulfway, as they went to a space station called Delusion, and they were there stalking through the corridors. They went there to slay the cult of Tendrical in the most thorough fashion ever, putting every human they find to the sword. So they went. Obviously, Ulfway have Farseers, so they were directed by fate, by visions, to go and slay every single human, because obviously they were carrying the Genestealer curse. The result is that the station sent a distress call, and Space Marines turned up of the Black Templars, so that wasn't helpful. And eventually, the last few survivors of the space station escaped. And apparently within a year, the symbols of the cult were seen on a dozen planets, including an Eldar maiden world. So some of those Black Guardians did not leave unchanged by the Genestealers. The other thing is, another example is a death world called Morris 3. Again, a challenge there where Castrang jungle fighters were deployed to do hunt and kill on everything. But of course, it only takes one Genestealer to not be found for Genestealers to re-emerge and begin population again. So that's just a few examples. Genestealers are really hard to get rid of, and of course, Genestealer cults even exist on like the hives of Necromunda as well. There's in fact an entire hive that got destroyed because of the Genestealer infestation, and there's a specific cordon around that hive. So there's a trench system built up around that hive, and planetary and the Necromundan
spiders, right?
Yeah, spiders, Astra Militarum platoons are deployed to stop anything coming out of that hive.
Yeah, they periodically bombard it, don't they?
Yeah, it's pretty bleak.
Cool. I like it. Very, very 40K there. Yeah. So, Chris, I think I had some notes here about the Catachan Jungle Fighter one that you mentioned.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing about that, which I thought was pretty cool, is that it was a rogue trader's menagerie crashed on the Death World. And that menagerie contained a Genestealer, and basically, like, it escaped, and some of the other like rare fauna from that menagerie, and they all got infected by the Genestealer, as well as like the local Death World inhabitants, the vicious creatures that live there as well. So yeah, the unlucky Catachan jungle fighters were deployed there for training, I believe, and baptism by fire as they had to fight off this wild Genestealer infestation. So not so much Genestealer Cults there, but still pretty fun.
Pretty brutal. The other thing we haven't said is also the relationship with hive fleets a bit more, is that ultimately the cult's main aim is to prepare a world for hive fleet invasion, and that's where shit gets kind of crazy, because in the prelude to the hive fleet arriving, and hive fleet arrival can take quite a long time once it's reached the local space of the system, because of how they use gravimetric distortion to travel space rather than using the warp. So once they're within the system, once they're near the system, you then start getting metamorphs turning up, no matter what the part of the cycle is of the breeding cycle of the Genestealer cult, or that bit of whoever's breeding with who. So metamorphs have much more vicious mutations, and are just more powerful than, say, first generation hybrids. But of course, once hive fleets arrived, it's party time for the cult, as they're obviously already risen up to fight the local forces. The hive fleet arrives and begins deploying its forces onto the planet, and the Tyranids, so the whole host of what? Tyranid warriors, Hormigants, Termagants, Zoanthropes, Carnifex, they ignore the cult initially. So they're basically, so that for that small period of time, they're fighting side by side, slaying the inhabitants. And then once it's all over, once they've won, the cultists, in their not stupidness, but in the kind of the thrall that they have towards their patriarch and to Genestealer cult, are almost like ready to embrace their brothers who are star gods, and then they get torn apart by the Tyranids, and they get torn apart by the pure strains of their cult. They are shredded. And there's basically that moment where even your first generation hybrid thinks, shit, this was a mistake, and they are rendered into nothing.
But then so are the Tyranids who do that. So it's a
they all become soup for
everything
becomes a soup for the hive fleet ships to feed, and for the Norn queens to take new genetic material to create new Tyranids. That's basically it of what Genestealer cults are. But how do we use them in our games? So, of course, the most important thing is Wrath and Glory Revised Edition has excellent rules already for Genestealer cults. You have hybrids, you have rules for hybrids, you have rules for of various forms of neophytes, I think, as well. You've also, that section is also
there's a pure strain in there as well, isn't there?
There is pure strains. That section is also really useful because it's not in the core rules of the weapons, but there is listed there the rules, and thus you can use them for all the weapons that Genestealer cults use, like the buzzsaw cutter thing, and like the mining laser, and like other weaponry that they use, like the mining explosives. So that's useful if you want to run your gang warfare, and you go, what's my ganger? I'm playing a game. I want to have a nice special new weapon, mining laser. That's good.
Yeah.
So use that section of the book in both ways.
You can also do the opposite. You can go, right, I need some brood brothers, so I'll just take this Imperial soldier, this and oh no, he's now part of a Genestealer cult.
Yeah, Guardsman, Genestealer cult, regular Imperial citizen, Genestealer cultists. I think even Chaos cultist rules, you can mostly use some ideas from that, and of course the mutation rules to represent, say, things like metamorphs. You could easily represent the variety of mutations that occur. An Ogren, while that's not in the core book, is in Forsaken Systems Guide. You could use an Ogren as a model for an aberrant. Yeah. So that's all pretty good stuff. But anyway, like that's we're talking rules wise there. What can we do as actual scenario wise? Mike, What's the best?
Yeah.
What would you go for?
Oof, I have a lot of ideas. Because really, Genestealer cults, they've been around in Warhammer for a long time, but they're kind of fertile. They're virgin territory. You know, it hasn't really been touched that much until recently in the Warhammer universe. So got a lot of ideas here.
Seventh Ed, I think their first actual codex was 7th edition, so
Yeah.
it's not that long ago.
Yeah. Otherwise, you would have had to go to like Citadel Journal or something to find an army list. Yeah.
That would be about right. Citadel Journal for second ed. Yeah.
Yeah. So,
They're
all right,
in-
first idea. This one's a little pedestrian here, but the insurgent world. So, Genestealer cults they're really tough to stamp out. And let's say you've got a world which is far away from an invading hive fleet, and that world might have actually had to crush dozens of cult uprisings generations apart. And basically, some of the new pure strains that were born they hide after a uprising is crushed, and they start new cults in different parts of the very complex society here. So, it's just a world that you might visit where this has happened multiple times. It might be something that your, say, rogue traders, inquisitorial cabal, or someone else have to watch out for.
Yeah.
And something I was thinking about with this, just an interesting side note, is that Genestealer cults, I'm pretty sure, I think we all agreed that they rely on just normal reproduction, isn't sped up or anything. So normal reproduction with the local species. So they actually have really big manpower issues in prolonged conflicts, as opposed to like the essentially limitless manpower of the Imperium. So these cults, when they rise up, they have to strike fast and try to overcome the local planetary defense force, or the uprising is probably going to fail.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's a fun basic kind of like setup to use. If you like say an Auto Xenos Inquisitor, or you'll say Death Watch that's sent in because there's been a Genestealer apparently is spotted. You can really start from. You could also look at it from different tiers, that kind of game, as you start with the initial kind of sightings that then escalate, and so you could look at how different parts of the Imperium have to deal with that. That'd be good fun.
Yep.
Yeah, you could have it as kind of a slow build campaign through the tiers, like the new scenario that they're releasing. Kind of, you start off with that lower level. Oh look, these are Brood brothers. Okay, we can kill them. Oh no, there's now neophytes and acolytes. Oh look, there's an aberrant. Oh my god, there's a load of preostrate. Crap. You could have that slow build up with the tiers quite nicely.
You could also have it as planetary hopping as well, because
Yep.
if you look at how, say, Eisenhorn has to planet hop to deal with a cult, and gets the first sense of cult activity, because where's that shipment of las guns? Where did that go? And then discovers that it's not just las guns going missing. There's other munitions not turning up where they should be, or maybe entire squads of Imperial Guardsmen not turning up, and that could easily look like any kind of cult activity going on, or even just, and I say cult activity, could easily just be, for any Inquisitor, could even be just a rogue planetary governor who's who's basically, because I've been watching Sharp recently, who's been raising legions in paper only, which would be a very, very Imperial administration.
Where's the money going? Follow the money. Oh my gosh!
The money.
Chris, this segues beautifully to the next idea, which is the cult bait and switch. So, Chris, you used this very, very well in the Necromunda Wrath and Glory one shot that we did. Usually when there's a hint of cult activity in the Warhammer world, Warhammer 40,000 world, players will assume that it's Chaos Worshippers. But as they get closer to the source, they're slowly going to realize that these mutations and cult precepts they're just too uniform for the ruinous powers. It's really a Genestealer cult.
Always fun to throw those bait and switches into any of the Warhammer games, because everybody goes, oh, there's weird shit going on, there's mutations, it's definitely chaos. Oh no, shit, it's not. Oh, now what do we do? It's so much fun to throw that into there.
And the fact is, a clever Genestealer cult would mostly even use a more naive chaos cult that they're aware of as cover for their activities.
Oh yeah, that's awesome. That's a great idea.
It's like, oh, you're off destroying this stuff. Well, do a little bit of work over here while you're doing that. I'm sure a Genestealer cult would find a corpse grinder cult quite useful at times, or hire them to do work for them. That would be really sinister. Yeah. Okay. Cool.
There's a lot of stuff in that bait and switch. I think that it's kind of what you'd expect with some of the gangs in Necromunda, but I think
Yeah.
it's definitely a cult thing that they could do.
And then at the other end of the spectrum is the fact that you've got the under society is easily infiltrated and turned, but eventually the cult is going to want to get its claws into someone more influential. So that gets you into the political games, and the reason why we come back to this and about it's a legion we've raised in paper only and things like that, is because that leads you into how a cult could be influencing the noble house rivalry that occurs in a hive or across a sector, and again gets you into like, well, why did this ship not arrive in the sector where it was meant to go? What was it carrying? Why is it gone missing? And then you find it went to a different way station. Like, why did it go there? And again, that's for an inquisitor, that's quite interesting. For a rogue trader, that's surprising. You could easily see even like a commissar, I would say a very zealous commissar, trying to find out why did he not get the reinforcements he was expecting, and finding out, well, it's because of this, and then pulling on the thread of a Genestealer cult somewhere and leading him to
Danica
go.
would be very, very angry.
Oh yeah, I could see her just coming face to face with some noble and going like, "Why are you a bit weird? Like, what is under there's something not right here." And the fact that that noble has a third arm under their cloak, something like that. So
what's that tattoo? That's an unauthorized tattoo.
So yeah, I think you could actually really do quite fun political games. I think you could take a lot from what we know of like from Vampire the Masquerade with political games and apply it to dealing with cults and Genestealer cults quite well. Obviously, the other route you can go, and we've already talked about the Death Watch, but you can also do it with Imperial Guardsmen, and then obviously the great inspiration for that is going to come from the new game. What's the new game called? Can't think of what it's called. What's the Warhammer game with the Skaven in it? That's
Vermintide. Oh, Darktide.
Darktide, yeah. So that you play like a kind of a fairly elite group of Astra Militarum. So you could easily do a survival horror scenario in a Space Hulk, hives, mines, death world, whatever, where they are sent in to flush out the enemy. So again, that would be high in the level of combat, but you would want to try and make use of the environment as the antagonist as well, and the puzzle to be solved.
I would look at it. You could quite easily combine this with the ideas behind the Aliens RPG, and you could have going on in there. Like, is one of the group an actual random? Is actually a member of the cult?
That would be great. That would be similar to the game obviously we ran, Mike, where you weren't a member of a cult. You were just, your commissar was driven mad already. But it's the same thing.
Play Mike.
So that's good fun. Other ideas then?
Oh, sure. So one thing, I was surprised this wasn't in the any of the material I read, but what if there's an infected rogue trader family that becomes a Genestealer cult? That would be terrifying. They have an entire fleet of ships. They can spread their cult to many worlds. And they have the paperwork to be going to all these places. It would take a long time for them to be discovered.
That could work really well when you've got the idea of a high fleet failed to arrive at a planet, so therefore the cult took over the planet, and there was a rogue trader there already. So it does fit within the stories and things that we've seen. So that would actually be terrifying, seeing a rogue trader part of a cult. But then there are stories of like rogue traders transporting all manner of things they shouldn't be. So
yeah, I mean, it's bad enough dealing with what's the creature I'm trying to think of? Ambles. They go from planet to planet feeding on stuff. Though they're not like
they amble between planets.
Yeah, you're not dealing with them eating infecting your DNA. They're just eating energy. What else have we got then? Non-human Genestealers. Mike, what have ideas?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think this is David's territory here. He knows a lot more about it than I do, and explained a lot of stuff about Tau Genestealer to me. So, David, where would you take this sort of angle?
So I looked into this because you wrote that you about Tau Genestealer Cults. So I thought, actually, is that a thing? And so we've already talked about that. But yeah, the cult or the Nexus virus can infect anything alive, anything that has biomass. It can affect that. So you could quite easily go to, and I think I said this before, I can't remember, but you could quite easily go somewhere like the jungles of Catachan and have the plants there be infected with the Nexus virus, and you could have kind of weird alien aberrant plants walking around. And I now have the what is it? Feed me. That stupid big plant. What's it called from the movie with?
Oh right, yeah, Venus flytrap.
Yeah, you can have things like that going on. But where I went with it, and what I would kind of like to kind of maybe see at some point, and I think could be quite a really fun but very very dark game, would be dealing with the Drukhari. So you'd have a Drukhari homunculi is playing around with some gene stealers that they've just happened to collect because they like to do this kind of stuff. And instead of kind of creating a new beastie thing that it did, the gene stealer wasn't quite dead and it infected the homunculi. And so the homunculi becomes part of the cult. And because of the way homunculi work, it can then spread the cult quite easily within the cursed city or the dark city of Komorra. And you could then, if you wanted to, you could do a Komorra based game where you have the cabals of Komorra fighting against this cult and trying to stop it. So you could start to play Eldari and Drukhari within Komorra as they're trying to weed out this insidious cult in a society that is very insidious in itself.
Yeah,
the
that's
city
pretty.
that kind of changes shape on you as well. I think that could be. It's a dark game, and it would require a lot of things being dealt with the players and a lot of lines within it. But I think that could be quite a really interesting way to deal with it. As we said before, Eldari, they're a little bit too. I think there's a little bit of an issue with whether they would actually get it. But we've got there's a case there from the history that could be some guardians with it.
Hey man, it's your game. You can do whatever you want. And if the players think it's cool, then awesome.
It's
Also,
more kind of the lines of people playing Drukhari and what Drukhari are, where you kind of have to have that conversation. Like,
Oh,
we know they're mass murdering
Absolutely.
subjects, but just be cool with it. Don't actually be these people.
Yeah.
Homunculi are also
Yeah.
not above actually taking the limbs off other species and grafting it onto other people. They're like the Zemeshay of 40k. So yeah, you could also they'll be breeding gene stealers anyway because they want to get like the genetic, like they want to get the organs.
The witch
and
cults
so
as
forth.
well would want them to fight in their
To fight because they're nuts.
What's it called? Gladiatorial combat. They'd want to do that, wouldn't they?
And while we're talking about safety and that kind of stuff, with regard to role playing games and gene stealers, don't be squicky about this. We do know that these cults do grow through human, regular, perfectly normal reproduction and that kind of stuff. Don't go into details about breeding camps or anything really squicky like that. That's not necessary. If it's something that you for some reason feel like really needs to be there, don't go into detail. Cut to black. Maybe just kind of maybe allude to it. I don't even think that's really that great.
Likewise, I would follow up on that is the fact that because obviously gene stealers, in the way that they deliver genetic material into you to take over your body, in essence, that is robbing players of agency and is let's be honest, it is in effect is much like obviously Alien, the xenomorphs. It's the same thing. It's that rape of the human body of what makes you human. So I think I would rule any player character that, as long as the player is fine with their character being offed, would more than likely blow their brains out before carrying on being a host to the Gene Stealer curse. So again, you need to have that conversation so that everyone's happy at the table. Their character is becoming a host, or they're going to die in the process of being tried to become a host, or something like that. Just make sure everyone's having fun. I think if you're again coming back to the thing of like 40 Wrath and Glory, because of the fact of the tiers, makes it quite fun to play at different levels. So if you can do that whole thing, like we're going to start the campaign playing the Imperial Guardsmen that come across it, or come across the problem, and then we'll carry on the rest of the campaign with our higher tier characters. Then in that case, maybe you should feel that might empower you to play through that happening to your character, given you are only playing that character for that introductory part of the story, much like in the start of X-Files, where a person gets offed, and because that's the way you set up the scenario. So yeah, just be aware, you want to make sure everyone has fun with these things that rob you of your agency.
Yeah, I think Genestealers and Drakari are kind of like the two ones which probably could cause biggest issues.
Slaanesh as well.
Yeah, but you're not going to go and play a Slaanesh character, are you?
Let's go play some Black Crusade sometime.
Yeah. Right. So
you guys at the end of the Warhammer get fantasy.
Okay. Well, we're gonna have to talk about that off camera at some point and figure out what the heck actually happened to everyone. But let's get back to Genestealer Cults, because I got two last ideas right here. So we have cult versus cult. So frequently, Genestealers travel to planets in small groups. So what's to say that two patriarchs don't form like rival cults or something like that? As your band of Inquisitor acolytes begin searching rumors of heresy, they'll actually find that there's two competing Xenos cults. So that could be a lot of fun right there.
That's very Tyranid survival of the fittest. I don't see why that would not happen.
Walk into the middle of that would be a great amount of fun, I think.
Absolutely. And the last one I've got is the cult refugees. And this is an interesting one. It's a bit of a stretch and something to be careful with, because it could get a little cheesy, but it could also be very serious and interesting. So as Chris alluded to, once the Hive fleets land and they absorb the Patriarch's biomass, there's this brief moment where the cult's psychic link is kind of severed, and basically the veil is lifted for the hybrids and the infected, etc. So 99% of the time, these cultists die horribly, their limbs are torn up, they become biomass soup, and they are absorbed into the Tyranid Hive fleet. But on occasion, maybe some of these cult members actually could escape on the last ship out of there. So these cult refugees, they're going to be mentally fucked up. There's no way around that. They've spent years in this death cult that has lied to them, and now they're part Xenos with all of the inquisitorial purging that entails. And they'll be on the run.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're going to be on the run. Let's be real about this, because anyone who escapes from a world with a cult insurgency is going to be suspect, and they're probably branded. They've got a tattoo. Maybe they have some sort of like mutation or some kind of difference from the human baseline. So it's going to be easy to find them out. So what's going to happen with these kinds of characters? Are they going to get absorbed into a new Genestealer cult? Would they be influenced by a Magus or a Patriarch on another world? Or would they have some sort of insight that could actually be valuable? Maybe there's an Ordo Xenos Inquisitor out there who actually wants one of these former cult members just to study or discuss things with. Maybe a rogue trader could find some kind of use for them. I don't know. It could be an interesting character concept or a good NPC.
That's a really interesting idea. Yeah, like
I think that could be really good, kind of like as a solo game. Like it's just the GM and one player, and you're just kind of taking this character as they're trying to do the survival horror thing.
Actually, you could play the survival horror of just the cultists trying to kill the Tyranids after it all switches around. Can you get off the planet before it all goes wrong?
Yeah.
Jesus, yeah, that would be pretty dark as well. That does bring up a question, like whether a lone cultist after their patriarch is dead and the rest of their cult is dead, what is the first when they is there still some biological instinct to breed? Does that lead to them restarting a cult?
Could be.
Do they have some semblance of their self again away from it?
Yeah,
it's a question
to them. It's a
big question.
It is a good question. I think the thing you just want to avoid with this is you don't want this to turn into like Genestealer Cult good guys. They're going to fight the Tyranids or something like that. You really want to just focus on the horror of this person being changed and realizing it. yeah, the biological imperative, that could be something that they have to struggle against. Or maybe the Inquisitor that finds them might do a snip snip or something. I don't know. So yeah, there's a lot of ways you could go with it, and I think this is something
Gave
interesting.
vasectomies.
Yeah,
Not
I
something
just
I'd ever think I'd say in a sentence.
mhm.
But yeah, it's a pretty bleak future for well, it's a bleak future of cultists anyway. I think that I also would say, like, I think of recent years, I think the miniatures range for them has been one of the strongest for 40k.
Yeah.
I feel like the miniatures range has more than likely been under lock and key for a long time until it was deemed right to bring them out.
Well, what I do know a little bit about where the miniature range with them, and they were specifically designed at the same time as the new ad mech were designed, and they were
Oh, cool.
specifically designed to be same size and same shape as the ad mechs, so you could kit bash them. So they were
Nice.
designed so you had this wonderful looking army, and they are a wonderful looking army, but they were also designed to show that you go, well, these are meant to come from any aspect of the Imperial Society. So let's make them have that ability. And so when we see them first come out, they came out in a box set with Ad Mech. They were designed so you could cut and swap them.
Mm-hmm.
And I do have a massive Genestealer Cult army, which is fully kit bashed. So
there's a lot of cool stuff for them. I mean, they're a really cool Necromunda gang as well to have. They're like the rules for them are in the Book of Ruin, which has all the Chaos Cults and Corpse Grinders, and has Genestealer Cult. So I think one of the campaigns you can play is a Genestealer Cult Uprising in Necromunda. So it changes how the Cult Uprising campaign operates, and they get some. If you're a Genestealer Cult, you get some cool things. And the great thing about that campaign is that I think if you loot that, your even regular gangs can be perverted, can become Genestealer Cult gangs. So you basically become in the thrall of the cult. So even in Necromunda, you get a lot of narrative fun with Genestealer Cults. But yeah, I mean, it'd be really fun to obviously in person run some demos involving Genestealers and Genestealer Cults on in the hives of, I don't know, Hive Caribbean would be fucking awesome. In Wrath and Glory,
cool.
yeah, Ocean Planet with Genestealers. What could be worse?
I'd love to see how they play on other planets and in other situations. We see a lot of the Hive stuff. I want to know how they'd work on an ecclesiarchy world.
Yeah. Right. Well, that's pretty much everything. I think we got some really good content ideas and overview for people wanting to run Genestealers in their campaigns of Wrath and Glory. Obviously, if you want to find out more information, you can listen to Darkhammer on www.darker-days.org. You can go over to our Facebook, Instagram at Darker Days Radio, Twitter. You can also find and carry on the conversation on our Discord. Obviously, there are plenty of other horror games talked about on the main show, and at some point I'm sure on Dread Cassette we're going to talk about like aliens in general, Xenos, Greys and Xenomorphs and other things within horror and why they're particularly frightening in horror media. That's pretty much it for now. I think nothing else to sign off on, I don't think.
Nope, that's it. To all the listeners out there, take it easy.
Yeah, we'll speak to you soon. So goodbye for now.
Bye.